In this presentation, we will cover federalism and intergovernmental relations. We will also cover how federalism and intergovernmental relations play a role in fiscal relations. Federalism is a constitutional division of governmental power between a central or national government and regional governmental units, which in the U.S. case are the states, with each having some independent authority over its citizens. The original purpose of the Federalist system was to prevent the concentration and misuse of power by a strong national government. States were viewed as a counterweight to the power of the national government. There is constant debate in American politics over what level of government should have power over which policy areas. In the U.S., we have a system of cooperative federalism, where some things are up to the states, some things are up to the federal government, and many policy areas are under the control of both the states and the federal government. Under dual federalism, the functions of the national and state governments are separate and distinct from each other. With cooperative federalism, the functions of the different levels of government are deeply intertwined. Dual federalism is also often referred to as layer cake federalism. You can imagine if federalism were represented by a layer cake, then the national government would be one layer and the state government would be another layer. The layers in the layer cake do not mix together, just like the responsibilities of the national government and the state governments do not mix in a system of dual federalism. Under this system, something like education policy would be either controlled by the national government and the states would have nothing to do with this policy area, or it would be a state responsibility and the national government would not get involved at all. Cooperative federalism is sometimes referred to as marble cake federalism. You can imagine if federalism were represented by a marble cake, you would see the different layers of the cake mixed together. There would be no clear divisions between the different parts of the cake, just as there would be few clear divisions between the powers of the national government and the state governments. In cooperative federalism, something like education policy is controlled partially by the national government and partially by the state governments. States can pass legislation setting standards for education as long as they are in compliance with regulations at the national level. Some things in a cooperative federalist system are in the control of one level rather than shared with the other. For example, national defense and foreign affairs is a policy area strongly in the control of the national government. Intergovernmental relations are all of the activities and interactions occurring between or among governmental units of all types and levels within the U.S. federal system. We don't think of the consequences of intergovernmental relations within our federalist system much because many of the decisions are made hidden from the public view. Intergovernmental relations depend heavily on the individual actions and attitudes of elected officials. These interactions determine what kind of relationships between governments exist. If the mayor of a major city in the state has a good relationship with the governor of the state, they may be more likely to have informal interactions that lead to various policy outcomes. Governors that have some kind of personal relationship may be more likely to discuss how to handle certain policy areas and may be more willing to give each other advice. Let's say that you are having some trouble with the course material in this class. If you are looking for some assistance from a classmate, you'd probably first contact someone you already know. If you don't know anyone else in the class, you may seek advice from someone within your major, because you're more likely to think that this person is like-minded and willing to help. Intergovernmental relations are similar in that they are dependent on the actions and attitudes of individuals. The intergovernmental relations between different units of government is a continuous series of informal contacts and exchanges of information and views that help government officials solve shared multi-governmental problems. As an example of intergovernmental relations, look at the issues involving education policy. The federal statute No Child Left Behind established national assessment standards for annual testing for students and yearly accountability reports on the progress toward meeting objectives for individual schools. Though the federal government required there to be assessment standards, states were left to decide specifically how to implement the program. As a result, local schools look to their state governments for guidance, and state governments look to each other for ways to handle implementation. These interactions between the federal government, state governments, and local school administrators are part of intergovernmental relations. Fiscal relations play a big role in federalism and intergovernmental relations. Fiscal federalism is defined as the complex of financial transactions, transfers of funds, and accompanying rules and regulations that increasingly characterizes national, state, national, local, and state-local relations. Fiscal federalism is important because different levels of government have varying capacity to implement programs. The federal government has the greatest taxing power and the most resources, but it provides the fewest direct services. While local governments provide most of the direct services, but they have the weakest tax base and the fewest resources. The tools of fiscal federalism help direct resources from the governments that have them to the governments that provide the services but don't have the resources. Many times, the directing of resources occurs through grants and aid. These grants direct funds to governments that need them. Formula grants are available to the state and local governments for purposes that are ongoing and common to many jurisdictions. These grants are distributed according to a set formula that treats all applicants uniformly. Project grants are available by application to the states and localities for an individual project. Categorical grants are grants with a purpose that is narrowly defined by the grantor, leaving the recipient relatively little choice as to how the grant funding can be used substantively and procedurally. In this presentation, we covered federalism, intergovernmental relations, and their impact on fiscal relations.